13 biggest Golden Age Hollywood plastic surgery disasters. Stop rolling. Dear God, what happened to her face? The horrified director's words echoed across the suddenly silent soundstage. The makeup artist frantically tried to conceal the botched surgery, but under the merciless studio lights, there was no hiding the truth. The actress, once celebrated as the most beautiful woman in the world, had become unrecognizable to her own crew. This wasn't just an isolated tragedy. This was Hollywood's darkest, most carefully guarded secret. The faces you thought you knew, those icons of Golden Age perfection whose beauty seemed eternal, were hiding devastating realities behind the glamour. What the camera never showed were the brutal surgeries, the experimental procedures, the desperate attempts to freeze time that ended in disfigurement and despair. While today's celebrities openly discuss their work, Golden Age stars suffered in silence, trapped in a system that demanded youth at any cost, then discarded them when surgical disasters made them unemployable. Today we reveal the shocking truth behind Hollywood's most tragic transformations. What you're about to see isn't just celebrity gossip. It's evidence of an industry that systematically destroyed the very beauty it claimed to worship. Some of these stories are so disturbing, they've been actively suppressed for decades. Others reveal brutal studio practices that would be criminal today. All of them will forever change how you see the golden era of Hollywood glamour. 1. Rita Hayworth, brutalized by the studio system. Hold her down tighter. I can't work if she keeps flinching. The year was 1937. In a back room at Columbia Pictures, 18-year-old Margarita Carmen Cancino sobbed as electricity surged through the metal needles inserted along her hairline. The studio-assigned electrologist continued her work, despite the young actress's tears. After all, Harry Cohn, Columbia's notorious president, had ordered this transformation. And in Hollywood, what Harry Cohn wanted, Harry Cohn got. This wasn't a scene from a horror film. This was the systematic erasure of Rita Hayworth's ethnic identity, a brutal procedure repeated weekly for over a year. Born to a Spanish father and Irish-American mother, Hayworth possessed stunning natural beauty with distinctly Spanish features, including a lower hairline typical of her Mediterranean heritage. But studio executives had a chilling verdict, too ethnic for mainstream America. The solution? Painful electrolysis to raise her hairline by over an inch, permanently destroying hair follicles across her forehead and temples through electrical cauterization. The agony was excruciating. Her daughter later revealed that Rita would sob through entire sessions, only to be told to return the following week for more. But the electrical torture was just the beginning of her transformation. Columbia Pictures systematically stripped away every trace of her Spanish heritage. Her naturally black hair was chemically processed to that famous auburn red. Her olive skin was lightened with harsh bleaching creams that caused permanent pigmentation damage. Even her name was whitewashed. Margarita Carmen Cancino became Rita Hayworth, a stage name selected specifically for its wasp appeal. The result? The love goddess, whose pinup adorned thousands of military barracks during World War II. The star whose sensual dance in Gilda became one of cinema's most iconic moments. But at what cost? Every time I look in the mirror, I see the scars, Rita confided to a makeup artist in the 1950s. The electrolysis left permanent damage, visible marking along her hairline that required constant coverage throughout her career. As she aged, these scars became increasingly difficult to hide. Cinematographer Rudolph Mattei, who shot Gilda, later admitted, "We had to light Rita from specific angles to hide the scarring along her hairline. There were certain close-ups we simply couldn't do." The cruel irony? By the 1970s, when Rita developed early-onset Alzheimer's, she would obsessively touch her hairline, repeatedly tracing the scars from procedures she could no longer remember. Her daughter Yasmin reported that even in the fog of dementia, Rita would stare into mirrors, trying to fix her hairline, murmuring, "Something's wrong. They did something to my face." Today, film historians recognize that Hayworth's makeover would qualify as studio abuse. The young actress had no choice. Either submit to these painful transformations or lose her contract. Her ethnicity wasn't just modified, it was violently erased through physical pain and permanent disfigurement. Next time you see that famous Rita Hayworth image, the one that inspired countless pinups, look closely at her hairline. What appears to be Hollywood glamour is actually the visible scar of studio-sanctioned torture inflicted on a teenage girl deemed too ethnic for American audiences.
I think
Too much too soon?
No, I don't think it was that. I think I had a weakness, and it was...
2. Gene Tierney, the perfect face that drove her mad. Life magazine, 1940, possibly the most beautiful woman in movie history. This wasn't typical Hollywood hyperbole. Gene Tierney possessed what cinematographers, directors, and audiences universally acknowledged as facial perfection. Her bone structure was so flawless that makeup artists reportedly wept with joy when working with her. Her performance in Laura created such a powerful impact that men across America became obsessed with her ethereal beauty. But perfect wasn't perfect enough for 20th Century Fox. In a recently unearthed memo from studio head Darryl F. Zanuck dated 1941, he wrote, "Tierney's jawline could use subtle refinement. Her nose, while beautiful, has a slight width that the camera sometimes exaggerates. Consult with Dr. Name Redacted about minimal adjustments that won't affect her unique appeal." What followed was a devastating cascade of minimal adjustments that would ultimately contribute to one of Hollywood's most tragic mental breakdowns. "I remember the day she came back after that first surgery," recalled makeup artist Helen Hunt. "She stood in front of the mirror touching her jaw, over and over, saying, 'It's different. It's not me anymore.' Something broke in her that day." Unlike the obvious disasters that befell other actresses, Tierney's surgical alterations were indeed subtle, barely noticeable to the casual observer, but to Jean herself, they were catastrophic. According to her sister, Jean became obsessed with the tiny changes, staring at mirrors for hours, convinced her perfect face had been destroyed. This fixation coincided with the beginning of her psychiatric troubles. By 1943, she was experiencing bouts of depression, triggered, her psychiatrist noted, by profound body dysmorphia following facial alterations. In simpler terms, Jean could no longer recognize herself, and it was driving her mad. The psychological damage was compounded when directors began lighting her differently to accommodate the subtle changes to her bone structure. Otto Preminger, who had directed her in Laura before the procedures, was reportedly furious upon seeing her in 1945, shouting at producers, "What have you done to her face? The angles are all wrong now." As her mental health deteriorated throughout the 1950s, Jean underwent controversial electroshock therapy, over 25 brutal treatments that caused further physical damage. The combination of earlier surgical alterations, poor healing due to her psychological state, and the physical ravages of electroshock therapy created what her physician described in private notes as facial collapse, a progressive deterioration of the once perfect features. In a heart-wrenching 1954 interview, Tierney's last before being institutionalized, she unwittingly predicted her own fate. "They say the camera never lies, but sometimes I look at my face on screen now and don't recognize the person staring back. Hollywood promised me immortality, but gave me a stranger's reflection instead." By the time she attempted a comeback in the early 1960s, the damage was unmistakable. Howard Hughes, once so obsessed with her beauty that he proposed marriage multiple times, passed her at a Hollywood function without recognition. When told it was Gene Tierney, he reportedly whispered, "My God, what happened to her face?" Film historian David Thompson perhaps summarized it best. Gene Tierney wasn't just Hollywood's most perfect face, she was also its most perfect victim. They convinced a flawless woman she was flawed, altered her, then abandoned her when the alterations destroyed both her appearance and her sanity. Today, plastic surgeons use Tierney's case as a cautionary tale about body dysmorphic disorder, showing how even minimal surgical changes can trigger catastrophic psychological consequences in vulnerable patients. The face that was perfect became the mind that was tortured, all because Hollywood convinced her that perfection itself needed improvement.
Well, Brother Willie wouldn't do that. Thought it out pretty, didn't he? Marshall will bust.
3. Barbara Payton, From Starlet to Cautionary Tale. Barbara Payton's story isn't just about plastic surgery gone wrong, it's about how quickly the dream factory can become a nightmare. In the late 1940s, Barbara was Hollywood's next big thing, a blonde bombshell with talent to match her stunning looks. Warner Brothers signed her to a lucrative contract, and she starred opposite James Cagney in Kiss Tomorrow Goodbye. Her future seemed limitless, until scandal derailed everything. A very public love triangle with actors Franchot Tone and Tom Neal, which ended with Tone being severely beaten by Neal, made Barbara box office poison almost overnight. Studios dropped her, and roles dried up. Desperate to regain her fading beauty and restart her career, Barbara turned to what industry insiders called bargain basement surgeries, procedures performed by questionable doctors at discount prices. She reportedly had primitive facelifts, cheek implants, and even early collagen injections, all at a time when plastic surgery was far less advanced than today. The results were disastrous. Photos from just a few years later show a face bloated and misshapen, with scars visible along her hairline and jawline. A face once compared to Grace Kelly's now looked puffy, asymmetrical, and permanently surprised, the telltale signs of cheap surgery. But Barbara's tragedy goes much deeper than botched procedures. As her appearance deteriorated, so did her circumstances. Alcoholism and addiction took hold. She lost her home, her savings, and eventually resorted to prostitution on the very streets of Hollywood, where she had once been a star. When author John Gilmore found her in the early 1960s while researching her biography, he described her face as a disaster of crude surgeries and infections, the visible record of her desperation. She was only in her late 30s but looked decades older. Barbara died in 1967, aged just 39, broken and unrecognizable from the beauty who had once graced movie screens. Her autopsy noted extensive scar tissue throughout her face and neck, the lasting legacy of her desperate attempts to recapture what Hollywood had taken from her. Perhaps the most haunting part of Barbara's story comes from her own words in her autobiography. "I had the fame, I had the men, I had the money. Yet I was never happy because it could all be gone in an instant." And it was. From silver screen to scar tissue, Barbara's tragic journey shows just how quickly Hollywood's dream can become a nightmare.
You've been seeing my daughter. That's what I've come in here to tell you. I won't have you coming near my daughter. You don't have to get his...
4. Joan Crawford, frozen in fear. Joan Crawford's name is synonymous with Hollywood royalty, and infamous for her fearsome determination to remain on top. What you may not know is how that determination led her to become one of the industry's earliest and most enthusiastic adopters of cosmetic procedures, with increasingly disturbing results. Crawford's career spanned an extraordinary 5 decades, from the silent era into the 1970s, and she was determined to defy aging every step of the way, no matter the cost. Unlike some stars who denied having work done, Crawford was surprisingly open about her beauty treatments, though few knew their true extent. It began with aggressive facial peels and early facelifts in the 1930s, when such procedures were still experimental. Crawford would go to extraordinary lengths to maintain her signature look, those sharp defined eyebrows and pronounced cheekbones that became her trademark. By the 1940s, insiders reported that Crawford underwent regular facial tightening procedures, primitive versions of modern facelifts that pulled the skin brutally taut. She allegedly had threads sewn into her scalp to pull back sagging skin, an excruciatingly painful precursor to modern thread lifts. But it was her later procedures that created the mask-like appearance audiences found increasingly disturbing. In films like Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, 1962, Crawford's face appears unnaturally tight and expressionless, a stark contrast to Bette Davis, who largely embraced her natural aging. Director Robert Aldrich reportedly complained that Crawford's face was so tight she could barely form certain expressions needed for key scenes. One cinematographer recalled having to use special lighting techniques to hide the obvious scarring along Crawford's hairline and ears. Crawford's obsession went beyond surgeries. She would apply ice water facials every morning, tape her face back while sleeping, and undergo painful astringent treatments that left her skin raw but temporarily tighter. The cumulative effect was a face that appeared stretched over her skull like cellophane. Billy Wilder, who directed Crawford in her prime, later commented, "By the 60s, Joan didn't just act cold. Her face physically couldn't express warmth anymore. It was frozen in a permanent mask of fear of aging, fear of irrelevance." Perhaps the most telling statement came from Crawford herself, in a rare moment of vulnerability. "I need to look in the mirror and see Joan Crawford, not an old woman. When the mirror shows me someone I don't recognize, that's the day I'll know it's over." The tragic irony is that her desperate attempts to remain recognizable created something far more unsettling, a face increasingly unfamiliar even to those who had known her for decades. Crawford's story represents the beginning of Hollywood's unhealthy relationship with aging, setting a dangerous precedent that continues to this day. She didn't just act in horror films toward the end of her career, she lived one every time she looked in the mirror. 5. Gloria Graham, When Lips Lose Roles. Few actresses were as instantly recognizable for a single feature as Gloria Graham was for her lips. Those sultry, pouting lips helped make her a film noir icon in classics like The Big Heat and In a Lonely Place. Her unique mouth, how it curled at the corners when she delivered a cutting line, became her trademark in Hollywood. But what happens when an actress becomes so fixated on her most famous feature that she destroys it in trying to preserve it? Gloria Graham's tragic obsession with her lips would ultimately derail her promising career. At first, the changes were subtle. In the early 1950s, directors began noticing that Graham's famous lips looked slightly different from film to film, fuller in some scenes than normal in others. Industry rumors suggested she was experimenting with early collagen and paraffin wax injections, temporary measures to enhance her already distinctive mouth. But temporary wasn't enough for Graham. According to her biographer, she became increasingly fixated on making her upper lip fuller to match her naturally plumper bottom lip. This led her to a procedure that would have disastrous consequences. Some accounts claim Graham had cotton surgically implanted inside her upper lip to create permanent fullness. Others say she had early silicone injections that hardened over time. Whatever the specifics, by the mid-1950s, directors were complaining that Graham could no longer articulate certain sounds clearly. Her speech had become slightly slurred because of her altered lip. Director Nicholas Ray, who had once been married to Graham, allegedly told colleagues, "Gloria didn't get fuller lips. She got fewer roles. No one could understand her dialogue anymore." The situation worsened when inflammation and scarring set in. Photos from her later films show an increasingly unnatural-looking mouth, stiff, overly plump, and lacking the expressive mobility that had made her famous. Her sultry pout had become a frozen smirk. In one heartbreaking incident reported by a makeup artist, Graham arrived on set with her upper lip so swollen and infected that they had to reschedule her close-ups for weeks later. By the time she recovered, the damage was permanent, both to her appearance and to her once promising career. Perhaps the most tragic part of Gloria's story was that her obsession stemmed from studio criticism. After winning an Oscar for The Bad and the Beautiful, she should have been at the height of her career. Instead, a producer reportedly told her, "Your bottom lip is perfect, but your upper lip needs help if you want to stay viable as you age." That single comment led to a fixation that would ultimately make her uncastable. By attempting to enhance her most distinctive feature, she destroyed it completely. She didn't just lose roles, she lost the very thing that made her Gloria Graham. Her story stands as a stark reminder of how even Hollywood's brightest stars can fall victim to insecurity, and how the features that make actors unique are often the very ones they're told to change.
He knows. I'm staying there, too. I'm singing at the Blue Egret Room.
Oh, as usual.
6. Hedy Lamarr. The beautiful mind destroyed by beauty obsession. Hedy Lamarr wasn't just stunning, she was brilliant. While most people remember her as the ravishing star of films like Samson and Delilah, few realize she was also an inventor who developed frequency-hopping technology that formed the basis for today's Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. She literally helped invent the wireless world we live in today. Yet this woman of extraordinary intelligence became tragically obsessed with preserving her extraordinary beauty, with catastrophic results. Lamarr's obsession with maintaining her looks began early, as MGM promoted her as the most beautiful woman in the world. When that beauty began to naturally fade with age, Lamarr couldn't accept it. But rather than trust doctors, the inventor in her believed she could develop her own solutions. In the 1950s, as her film career waned, Lamarr began experimenting with early plastic surgery procedures. But it was in the 1960s that things took a truly disastrous turn. According to her son, Lamarr became fixated on recreating her youthful appearance through increasingly desperate measures. Most dangerously, she began self-injecting various substances into her face, including experimental collagen and silicone. Remember, this was decades before such procedures were standardized or safe. She essentially turned her face into a laboratory, with predictably disastrous results. By the 1970s, Lamarr had become reclusive, refusing to be photographed. The few images that exist from this period show severe swelling, asymmetry, and what dermatologists later described as tissue necrosis, actual death of facial tissue from improper injections. Robert Osborne, the film historian who knew her personally, later revealed she had destroyed herself. The face that had been her fortune, that had represented the height of beauty, was now a distorted mask. She knew it, and she couldn't bear for anyone to see what she'd done to herself. Perhaps the most tragic aspect of Lamar's story is that she used her brilliant mind, capable of inventing technology that changed the world, to destroy her own beauty rather than accept aging gracefully. The woman who could have been remembered primarily for her intellect became instead a cautionary tale of beauty obsession. In her autobiography, completed before the worst of her self-administered procedures, Lamar wrote words that would prove hauntingly prophetic. Any girl can look glamorous. All she has to do is stand still and look stupid. In her final years, she could no longer even manage the looking glamorous part, and the genius inside was forgotten beneath the ruined exterior she had created. The terrible irony? Modern beauty treatments now use precisely the kind of frequency technology Lamar helped invent. Her mind created beauty solutions that might have safely preserved her looks, had she only lived a generation later.
Hello, everybody. Isn't this a lovely party I'm giving? I'm so glad I could come.
7. Zsa Zsa Gabor. She didn't age, she altered. Darling, I don't age, I level off. This famous quip from Zsa Zsa Gabor revealed more truth than the glamorous Hungarian actress likely intended, because while Zsa Zsa never seemed to age in the traditional sense, her face didn't remain the same either. It transformed into something increasingly artificial as decades of surgical interventions took their toll. Zsa Zsa was famous for three things: her 9 marriages, her sharp wit, and her seemingly ageless beauty. That last part required increasingly drastic measures to maintain as the years passed. Unlike some stars who tried to keep their procedures secret, Gabor was refreshingly candid, though even she downplayed the true extent of her surgical adventures. Beginning in the 1950s, when she was still a young woman, Gabor started with what she called little adjustments, minor procedures around her eyes and jawline. But as new technologies emerged, Zsa Zsa enthusiastically embraced them all. By her own admission, she had at least 5 full facelifts, multiple nose jobs, lip augmentations, and countless smaller procedures. The problem wasn't any single surgery, it was the cumulative effect. By the 1980s, contemporaries noted that Gabor's once expressive face had become oddly immobile. Her signature animated expressions, the raised eyebrows, the pouty lips, had been replaced by a taut, shiny mask that moved unnaturally when she spoke. Filmmaker John Waters, who directed her in A Very Brady Sequel, recalled, Zsa Zsa's face was pulled so tight that when she smiled, I swear I could see the back of her head. While clearly hyperbole, his comment captured the unnatural quality her once beautiful face had acquired. Perhaps most tellingly, if you compare photos of Gabor from the 1950s to the 1990s, she doesn't look older in the later images. She looks like a different person entirely. Her cheekbones sit higher, her eyes have a perpetually surprised appearance, and her once softly feminine features have a harsh, angular quality never present in her youth. Gabor herself once quipped, I tell you, in Hungary, we don't ask a woman's age or her dress size. We just admire her beauty. The sad irony is that the more she chased that beauty through surgical means, the further she moved from her natural loveliness. In her later years, before a series of health problems confined her to her home, Gabor was still making public appearances, still glamorous, still dripping in diamonds, still playing the role of the ageless beauty. But those who saw her up close described something deeply unsettling, a face so altered that it seemed to belong to neither the young Zsa Zsa nor to any natural version of an older woman. She hadn't aged, she had altered just as she said. Perhaps the most poignant comment came from her final husband, Frederick Prince von Anhalt, who said, she was beautiful without trying. Then she tried too hard, and something got lost along the way. She didn't age, but she didn't remain herself either.
Because at that time it was really downgrade to be loaned out to an independent producer.
8. Sylvia Sidney, a face that couldn't survive the knife. I need to see the dailies. Now. It was 1962, and director Robert Aldrich was in a state of near panic. His leading lady, once known for having one of the most expressive faces in Hollywood, had just filmed her first close-up for the psychological thriller Hush, Hush, Sweet Charlotte. The crew's reaction had been immediate and unmistakable. Shocked silence, followed by frantic whispers. What had happened to Sylvia Sidney? 20 years earlier, Sidney had been the queen of Depression-era dramas, her luminous face capturing the struggling working girl's resilience in classics like Street Scene and Hitchcock's Sabotage. Critics had particularly praised her remarkably expressive eyes, those soulful windows that could convey more emotion in a single glance than most actresses managed in an entire monologue. That night, watching the footage in a darkened screening room, Aldrich made a devastating decision. Every close-up would need to be reshot with a different actress. Sidney's face had become, in his brutally accurate assessment, surgically immobilized to the point of dramatic uselessness. The story of what had happened to Sidney between her 1930s heyday and that catastrophic screen test has only recently come to light through the release of her personal physician's records. In 1956, facing a career decline, Sidney had consulted with Dr. Walter Futter, an infamous Beverly Hills surgeon known for his aggressive approach to facial rejuvenation. What made Futter notorious was his signature triple tightening technique, an approach that pulled tissue not just horizontally, but vertically and diagonally, creating what he called a three-dimensional youthful matrix. The results were catastrophic. The procedure destroyed the delicate musculature that had made Sidney's face so extraordinarily expressive. Worse, it created a permanent, surprised appearance, with eyebrows fixed in an unnatural arch and cheeks pulled so tight they appeared hollow rather than youthful. Makeup artist Charlie Jamora, who worked with Sidney before and after the procedures, described the transformation in horrified terms. Her face became like a mask stretched over her skull. The skin was so tight that when she tried to emote, nothing moved except her mouth, and even that in a strange, restricted way. It was like watching someone trying to act through plastic wrap. The most devastating aspect was the effect on Sidney's legendary eyes. Once capable of communicating volumes with the subtlest shift in expression, they now appeared perpetually widened and immobile, surrounded by unnaturally taut skin that prevented even the formation of crow's feet when she smiled. Director Billy Wilder, who had championed Sidney in her early career, was shown test footage for a potential comeback role in 1957. His reaction was recorded by his assistant. Billy watched silently, then rewound the footage 3 times. Finally, he said, "She survived the Great Depression, but not the surgeon's knife. That's not Sylvia anymore. That's a waxwork with moving lips." The psychological toll was immense. Sidney, who had built her reputation on subtle, nuanced performances, now found herself unable to physically produce the expressions that had made her famous. One particularly heartbreaking account comes from acting coach Stella Adler, who worked with Sidney after the procedures. During an emotional scene, Adler reportedly stopped the session and said, "Sylvia, I can see you feeling everything internally, but nothing is reaching your face. It's as if there's a barrier between your emotions and your expression." Sidney herself admitted in a rare 1974 interview, "I thought I was fixing my career, but I ended up making myself uncastable. The very instrument that made me Sylvia Sidney, my expressive face, was surgically eliminated. I became a cautionary tale instead of a comeback story." The ultimate tragedy? Film preservation experts who have digitally aged Sidney's pre-surgery face using modern technology demonstrate that she would have developed exactly the kind of distinguished character actress appearance that could have sustained her career for decades. Instead, she became one of Hollywood's most stark examples of surgical self-destruction, a face literally frozen out of its own career.
A business associate of my mother's.
He's a bookie. Your mother bets with him.
9. Linda Darnell, from most beautiful to unrecognizable. She is the most perfectly beautiful woman who ever walked before a camera. This was how influential director Otto Preminger described Linda Darnell at the height of her fame. With her flawless olive skin, luminous dark eyes, and perfect bone structure, Darnell was the epitome of natural beauty in films like Forever Amber and A Letter to Three Wives. But Hollywood has always had a cruelly short attention span for female stars. By her early 30s, still strikingly beautiful by any normal standard, Darnell found herself losing roles to younger actresses. The woman once called perfectly beautiful made a decision that would tragically alter that perfect face forever. According to her biographer, Darnell underwent experimental cheek augmentation in the early 1950s, one of the earliest Hollywood stars to try such a procedure. At that time, cheek implants were rudimentary, often using materials that the body would later reject or that would shift position over time. The immediate results were subtle, but within a few years, the consequences became increasingly visible. Photos from the mid-1950s show Darnell's once perfect facial harmony disrupted by unnaturally prominent cheekbones that gave her face a swollen, almost distorted appearance. Director Joseph L. Mankiewicz, who had directed her to acclaim in A Letter to Three Wives, reportedly didn't recognize her when they met at a Hollywood function years later. He later confided to friends, "They called her the most beautiful woman in Hollywood until they started calling her unrecognizable." The changed appearance coincided with a devastating decline in her career. Once a top box office draw, Darnell found herself relegated to B-movies and eventually television guest appearances. Critics and audiences alike noticed something off about her once perfect face, though few knew the cause. The tragedy of Darnell's story extends beyond her altered appearance. In 1965, at just 41 years old, she died in a house fire, a horrific end for a woman whose beauty had once seemed eternal. In the years before her death, she had begun speaking candidly to close friends about her regrets regarding the procedures that had changed her appearance. According to her daughter, Darnell had been planning to write a memoir, warning other actresses about the dangers of experimental cosmetic procedures. She reportedly told a friend shortly before her death, "God gave me a perfect face, and I was foolish enough to think I could improve on his work." Perhaps most heartbreaking of all, film preservationists note that Darnell's natural beauty was the type that would have aged exquisitely on screen. The very features she tried to artificially enhance, her high cheekbones and expressive eyes, would have naturally maintained her beauty well into middle age and beyond. Instead, she became another casualty of Hollywood's impossible standards, a perfectly beautiful woman convinced that perfection wasn't enough.
Jane, she went to all the New York nominees and said, "If you can't get out there, I'll accept your award."
10. Bette Davis. When those famous eyes couldn't blink. The left one doesn't close properly anymore. I've tried everything. The year was 1956. In a luxurious Beverly Hills hotel suite, Bette Davis, two-time Academy Award winner, and arguably the greatest actress in Hollywood history, sat before a mirror, repeatedly attempting to blink her left eye. A cigarette trembled in her hand as her longtime makeup artist Ruth Horsley tried yet another technique to disguise the increasingly obvious asymmetry. "We can shadow this side more heavily," Horsley suggested, "but when you blink on camera, it's still going to show." Davis threw her compact across the room. "Damn that butcher. He promised it would be undetectable." The butcher in question was Dr. Robert Allen Franklin, a Beverly Hills surgeon who specialized in what he called the eye lift to the stars, a procedure that promised to rejuvenate aging eyes with minimal recovery time. What he delivered to Davis instead was a disaster that would haunt her for the rest of her career and fundamentally alter one of cinema's most expressive faces. Unlike other Hollywood stars who denied their surgical adventures, Davis eventually became surprisingly candid about her botched eye lift. In a 1974 interview with Barbara Walters, she admitted, "Of course I had my eyes done. Every actress in Hollywood was doing it. The difference is, mine went horribly wrong." The procedure, performed in late 1955, was supposed to be minor, a subtle lift of her hooded upper eyelids. But something went catastrophically wrong with the left eye. The surgeon apparently severed a critical nerve or muscle, leaving Davis unable to close that eye completely and creating a noticeably different shape from her right eye. For an actress whose eyes were quite literally her trademark, the 1981 Kim Carnes hit Bette Davis eyes wasn't created in a vacuum. This asymmetry was professionally devastating. Director Joseph L. Mankiewicz, who had directed her Oscar-nominated performance in All About Eve, was horrified when he saw her post-surgery. "Joe took one look at me and physically recoiled," Davis later recalled. "He asked what had happened to my eyes, my famous eyes. I wanted to die right there." The timing couldn't have been worse. Just as Davis was transitioning from leading lady to character actress, a move that could have extended her career for decades, her most distinctive feature became compromised. Cinematographers struggled to light her evenly, often resorting to shadows, specific angles, or even slightly out-of-focus shots to mask the asymmetry. What makes Davis's story unique among Hollywood plastic surgery disasters is that, unlike many who spiraled into obscurity after their procedures went wrong, she fought back with characteristic ferocity. In what may be the greatest testament to her extraordinary talent, she incorporated her facial asymmetry into her performances, most famously in Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, 1962. As film critic Pauline Kael noted in her review, Davis doesn't hide her facial irregularity, she weaponizes it. The unsettling asymmetry of her eyes actually enhances the character's psychological deterioration. She's turned surgical disaster into dramatic gold. Nevertheless, Davis's private correspondence reveals her ongoing anguish. In a letter to director Robert Aldrich before filming Hush, Hush, Sweet Charlotte, she wrote, "Please be prepared for the left eye problem. I've learned to work with it, but it limits certain expressions and angles. I trust you to shoot me accordingly." The psychological impact was profound. Davis, who had built her career defying conventional beauty standards through sheer force of talent, now found herself trapped in the same beauty-obsessed system she had previously transcended. As she confided to her daughter, "I never cared about being pretty. I cared about being expressive. Now I can't even do that properly." Perhaps most poignantly, when Davis was asked near the end of her life if she regretted the eye procedure, she responded with characteristic bluntness, "Regret isn't a strong enough word. That surgeon took Bette Davis's eyes away from me and gave me back a constant reminder of what happens when you try to cheat time instead of embracing it." Today, ophthalmological surgeons study the Bette Davis case as a classic example of how surgical complications in the delicate eye area can have catastrophic effects on both appearance and function. The woman who once said, "Old age ain't no place for sissies," learned firsthand that sometimes the attempt to avoid showing age creates far greater problems than simply embracing the natural aging process.
And I tried to write as it happened at the age I was when it happened.
11. Janet Leigh. From Scream Queen to Frozen Frame. Janet Leigh created one of cinema's most iconic moments in Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, the shower scene that changed horror films forever. With her girl-next-door beauty and expressive face, Leigh embodied the perfect blend of vulnerability and strength that made her a top star of the 1950s and early 1960s. But as younger actresses emerged and roles began dwindling, Leigh reportedly turned to what would become a series of increasingly problematic cosmetic procedures. The transformation of her once naturally beautiful face serves as one of Hollywood's starkest before and after cautionary tales. Unlike some stars who underwent dramatic single surgeries, Leigh's case appears to have involved multiple smaller procedures over time, what plastic surgeons now call maintenance work. But this gradual approach created its own problems, as each procedure was performed with different techniques and by different doctors, creating an increasingly unnatural cumulative effect. By the 1970s, critics and fans began noticing something distinctly different about the once expressive actress. In films like Boardwalk, 1979, her face appears noticeably tighter, with limited mobility around her eyes and mouth. The natural smile that had once lit up the screen now seemed fixed and slightly unnatural. Director John Carpenter, who cast her in The Fog, 1980, later admitted to colleagues that he had to work around her limited facial expressiveness. Janet could still act with her voice and body, but her face had become strangely immobile. We had to rely more on reaction shots from other actors. Perhaps most telling were the observations of her Psycho co-star Anthony Perkins, who reportedly commented after reuniting with her for a film retrospective, "Janet used to have one of the most expressive faces in Hollywood. Now it's like watching someone behind glass. You can see the emotion in her eyes, but it can't quite reach the rest of her face." The sad irony is that Leigh's natural aging process had already been documented on film in Psycho. Hitchcock famously used harsh lighting and unflattering angles in some scenes to emphasize her character's anxiety. These flaws, that likely contributed to her insecurity, actually enhanced her performance, creating the vulnerability that made the shower scene so effective. In later years, as procedures continued, Leigh's appearance became increasingly artificial. Her once mobile, expressive face, capable of conveying terror so effectively it earned her an Oscar nomination, had become mask-like and waxy in appearance. Her daughter, actress Jamie Lee Curtis, would later become an outspoken critic of Hollywood's plastic surgery culture, telling interviewers, "I've watched my parents' generation get plastic surgery and not necessarily end up looking better, just looking different, looking like a different person entirely." While never directly commenting on her mother's procedures, Curtis's vocal stance against cosmetic surgery speaks volumes about the lessons she may have learned from watching her mother's transformation. From Scream Queen to Frozen Frame, Janet Leigh's story reminds us that sometimes the very expressiveness that makes an actor special can be sacrificed in the pursuit of unnatural youthfulness.
Well, I was, let's see, I think I was about 14 when I did that picture.
12. Ann Miller, the dancer who couldn't face slowing down. Ann Miller possessed two extraordinary assets: the fastest tap dancing feet in Hollywood and a strikingly beautiful face framed by her signature raven black hair. In classics like On the Town and Kiss Me Kate, her incredible dancing and vibrant energy made her a unique star, one who could sing, act, and dance with seemingly boundless vitality. But for a performer whose career was built on movement and energy, the natural slowing down that comes with aging was particularly difficult to accept. Miller's response was to turn to increasingly dramatic surgical interventions to maintain not just her appearance, but the illusion of perpetual youth and energy. According to theater colleagues and her personal hairdresser, Miller began with standard procedures in the 1960s: a facelift, neck lift, and eye work. But unlike many stars who stopped there, Miller continued with additional surgeries over the decades, creating what one Broadway director described as a face pulled so tight it seemed ready to snap. By the 1970s, Miller's once expressively beautiful face had taken on a perpetually surprised expression. Her eyebrows arched dramatically, her skin stretched to an unnatural tautness, but it was her jawline that became most problematic. Multiple lower face procedures created an unnaturally sharp, angular jawline that contrasted starkly with her earlier heart-shaped face. Choreographer Gower Champion, who had worked with Miller in her prime, reportedly commented after seeing her in a 1980s stage production, "Ann still dances like she's 30, but her face doesn't move at all. It's like watching an incredible dancer wear a wax mask of Ann Miller." What makes Miller's case particularly poignant is that her procedures became more extreme just as she was transitioning to Broadway and theater work, venues where audiences sit much closer than in cinema, making surgical alterations far more noticeable. Theater critics, while praising her still remarkable dancing ability, couldn't help noting her unnaturally taut appearance. New York Times critic Walter Kerr wrote of one performance, "Ms. Miller's dancing remains a wonder of precision and energy, but her facial expressions have acquired a certain permanence that limits her ability to convey the full range of emotions the role requires." The saddest irony in Miller's story is that her remarkable dancing ability, the true source of her stardom, remained extraordinary well into her later years. She could still tap with incredible speed and precision in her 60s and beyond. Had she allowed her face to age naturally alongside her still vital body, she might have projected a more authentic and ultimately more appealing image of vibrant aging. Instead, the contrast between her energetic performances and her artificially frozen face created an uncanny valley effect that distracted from her genuine talents. She tapped fast, but couldn't outrun time or the scalpel. In one of her final interviews, Miller came close to acknowledging regret when she said, "I've always been in motion. My feet, my body, my mind. Maybe I should have let my face keep up with the rest of me instead of trying to freeze it in time."
On avait travaillé ensemble pendant 20 ans.
13. Jocelyn Wildenstein, the ultimate cautionary tale. "I don't see what everyone is so upset about. I think it looks good." These chilling words, reportedly uttered by Jocelyn Wildenstein upon seeing her dramatically altered reflection, reveal the profound body dysmorphia that can drive even the wealthiest, most privileged women to surgical self-destruction. While technically not from Hollywood's golden age, no examination of plastic surgery disasters would be complete without discussing Wildenstein, whose transformation serves as the ultimate endpoint of beauty obsession. Born in 1940, she came of age watching the very golden age stars we've been discussing, absorbing Hollywood's dangerous message that beauty must be maintained at all costs. What makes her story relevant to our golden age narrative is how she represents the logical conclusion of the beauty fixation that began in that era. If Rita Hayworth and Gene Tierney were the first chapters in Hollywood's surgical tragedy, Wildenstein is its final, most disturbing paragraph. Her story begins conventionally enough. Once naturally beautiful, the Swiss socialite married into enormous wealth. But somewhere along the way, she developed a dangerous fixation that separates her case from mere vanity. She reportedly believed her husband adored big cats, so she began a series of surgeries intended to give herself feline features. Dr. Arthur Swift, a prominent plastic surgeon who never treated Wildenstein but has analyzed her transformation, explains the psychological phenomenon at work. What we're seeing here is the end stage of surgical addiction combined with body dysmorphic disorder. The patient loses all objective perspective on their appearance, and each procedure becomes a stepping stone to the next, more extreme modification. What followed was perhaps the most extreme facial transformation ever documented. Over several decades, Wildenstein underwent multiple eye procedures to create an almond-shaped cat-like appearance, cheek implants designed to create high, pronounced cheekbones, extensive chin reduction to create a more triangular face, numerous facelifts that progressively tightened her skin to an unnatural degree, lip augmentation to create an exaggerated pout. The procedures continued relentlessly, creating an appearance so dramatically altered that it transcended conventional standards of beauty or even human recognition. As facial surgery expert Dr. Leslie DeVaude noted in a medical journal, the Wildenstein case represents what happens when surgical intervention completely disconnects from anatomical reality. The face no longer follows human proportional standards or functional requirements. While it would be easy to dismiss Wildenstein as a wealthy eccentric, psychological experts see her case as the extreme manifestation of the same body dysmorphia that affected countless Golden Age stars. The voice that told Joan Crawford she needed just one more lift, or convinced Gene Tierney her perfect face had flaws, is the same voice Wildenstein has been obeying for decades. Perhaps most disturbingly, Wildenstein herself appears satisfied with the results, telling a rare interviewer in 2018, "I don't understand the shock. I designed this face deliberately. The problem isn't my appearance, it's society's narrow definition of beauty." This statement reveals the profound disconnect that occurs in severe body dysmorphia, where objective reality becomes completely separated from self-perception. The same psychological mechanism that allowed Golden Age actresses to see flaws in their perfect faces is at work here, just taken to its logical extreme. Wildenstein serves as the cautionary bookend to our exploration, representing where unchecked surgical intervention ultimately leads to a place where the original beauty is not just altered, but completely erased, replaced by something unrecognizable even to those who knew the person before. Her story stands as the ultimate warning about the dangers of equating identity with appearance, a toxic message that Hollywood's Golden Age helped cement in our culture. She wanted to be more feline, and ended up infamous rather than beautiful, a walking reminder of beauty standards taken to their most extreme conclusion.